Hello everyone, welcome to a new CAMNES studio video. In this video we are going to see up close a very peculiar artifact, the Narmer Palette. So, the Narmer Palette. This artifact is a cosmetic palette that dates back to the 4th millennium BCE, and cosmetic palettes were actually quite used in ancient Egypt because both men and women wore makeup, and therefore these kinds of objects were used for grinding pigments, for grinding minerals, for cosmetic purposes. However, the Narmer Palette is not an actual cosmetic palette. It is more a ceremonial, a decorative palette, which, however, has some elements in the decoration that recalls the origin of the cosmetic palette. And I'm talking about the register where two animals are represented one in front of the other and their necks twisted around each other and create a sort of circular depression that in a proper cosmetic palette was the part used for grinding minerals. The Narmer Palette is not the only decorative palettes that we have belonging to the 4th millennium BCE. Actually, we have many palettes of these kinds, but the Narmer Palette is the most important one, because according to some scholars, it refers to the moment where a king, King Narmer, whose name is inscribed into this artifact, was able to unify Egypt. At that time, Egypt was divided into Lower and Upper Egypt, and Narmer, according to some scholars, was the very first king of both these two entities. So the very first one who was able to unify these two entities and create the modern Egypt. I would like to start describing this object from the upper part of both sides. As I said, both sides of the artifact are decorated, and the upper register is basically the same, presents basically the same decoration on both sides. As you can see, we have two images of a cow goddess, and she is represented 2 times on one side and 2 times on the other side. Probably you are familiar with Hathor, who was the most famous cow goddess in ancient Egypt, but in this case, the goddess who is represented on the Narmer Palette is probably not Hathor, but Bat, another important cow goddess. Between these images of the goddess, we have the name of the king who is represented on the palette. And therefore we can find 2 different hieroglyphs which are used to write his name, Nar and Mer. Therefore, the name of this king is Narmer. Those signs are inscribed into a sort of a frame that is called serech, and that is decorated with a specific motif that is usually called palace facade motif. The serech is used as a cartouche, therefore it was used to encircle the name of the king. So I would like to focus now on the side where the king is wearing the so-called white crown, so the crown that was associated to Upper Egypt. Here, the king is way bigger than any other figure in the same scene, which means that he is the most important person represented in that scene, and he is also shown in a very peculiar pose. that same pose will remain exactly the same during the course of the ancient Egyptian history. So that's the reason why I would like to underline it and underline the importance of this body language. The pharaoh, the king, is represented while holding with one hand the hair of his enemy. The enemy is represented on his knees, defeated, while with the other hand, the pharaoh is represented while holding a mace. And so this specific image, as I said, will remain exactly the same during the course of the ancient Egyptian history. Behind the figure of the king, we have a sandal bearer. Sandal bearers, as well as fan bearers, were usually employed as a symbol of the importance of the person, of the people who are represented in front of them. And therefore they usually are employed to underline the importance of the king, like in this case. Below the feet of the king, you can see a couple of other enemies, and they are represented completely defeated, almost crushed by the figure of this gigantic king. Probably the most cryptic part of this side of the object, of the artifact, is given by the scene represented in the top right part of this side. Here you can see a falcon while he is holding a sort of hook or roped-like object, which is attached to a head, a human head, which emerges from a series of papyrus plants. According to some scholars, this scene can be read as the pharaoh, therefore the falcon, who was able to subdue his enemies, who belonged to Lower Egypt. In fact, papyrus plants were a symbol of Lower Egypt, and consequently the scene is a sort of allegorical representation of the power of the king who was able to overpower his enemies. According to other scholars, however, we have also to consider the quantity, the number of plants, of papyrus plants that are represented in the scene. Because in hieroglyphs, a papyrus plant was used to identify the number 1000, and therefore the scene should be read: the pharaoh was able to defeat 6,000 enemies. So we also have, according to these scholars, we also have the quantity of enemies. As for what concerns the other side of the palette, we have the top part that we already saw concerning the name and the Bat goddess representation. But again, here we can see the pharaoh, the king, who is depicted way larger, way bigger than the other people represented in the scene. But in this case, the pharaoh is not wearing the so-called white crown, but the red crown, which is the symbol of Lower Egypt. That means that the same person, Narmer, was at the same time king of Upper and Lower Egypt. That's the reason why we think that this object somehow celebrates the unification of Egypt under one pharaoh, under one king. In the same part of the decoration, in the same register, I would like to underline the presence of the enemies of the kings, who are represented completely defeated. I mean, they are corpses. We can see a series of corpses and decapitated. And in fact, their heads is represented between their legs. The second register, we saw that before, represented this couple of mythological animals, and it's a link to the original original purpose of a cosmetic palette, but I would like also to underline the last register of this side of the palette, where a ball is represented while stepping on an enemy. And here again, we can see a sort of allegorical representation of the king, who in this case is represented as a ball. So in this case, the ancient Egyptian art wants to underline the physical strength of the pharaoh, not only his power, but also his physical strength as a ball, as a proper ball. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you have some questions not only concerning the Narmer Palette but also archaeology in general, please email us at ask@camnes.org. Thank you so much. Bye.
Hi guys, if you want to discover more about archaeology and our ancient past from a different perspective, make sure to click on the CAMNES logo here below. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you will never miss an episode and join the archaeological community in search of the truth.